lesson will introduce you to the various types of conditional sentences that can be found in Greek. Conditional sentences are, in English, if-then statements. So, and the if portion is generally referred to as the protasis, and the then portion is the apodosis. In Greek, if you want to negate an if portion, we're going to negate it with may. And if we want to negate the then portion, we're going to use u or uk or uk. Now, conditions can be broken up into a number of ways, and they're all based on the relative truth of the statement. That is, if the if statement is true, probable, or not true, and then the resulting apodosis, whether that's true or not true, based on the protasis. Now, a couple other things. If in Greek is a, and it will be followed by various moods or tenses. There is no word in Greek for then, so you're going to have to supply that if you want it. The other thing to note is that there is no particular order. Just as in English, we can say, if this happens, then I will be angry, or I will be angry if this happens. In the same way with Greek, we can use either clause can appear in either order. So we're going to break these into three different ways. The simple condition is the easiest one to form. And these are presumed true. That is, they're for argument's sake. We're not saying whether the protasis, the if portion, actually happened. We're just assuming that it did. So we have a past simple, in which case we're going to use a plus a past indicative. And this makes sense because these are presumed true. They're true statements. So we're going to use the indicative. And this can be either aorist or imperfect. And then we're going to use a past indicative in the apodosis. So we would say something like, if I had money, I was happy. I'm not saying whether or not I did or didn't have money. I'm just saying that if this were the case, then this was the result. In the present simple, again, same way, a, but here, because we're talking about the present tense, we use the present indicative, followed by the present indicative. We're assuming truth here. So, if I have money, I am happy. Now, the future simple, or what I'm going to refer to as the future simple, oftentimes, more often in Greek grammar, is referred to as the future more vivid or the future minatory, minatory meaning a threat. The future is by nature not, we can't say that it actually occurred, but here we can presume that the future is true. So we're going to use a plus future indicative, followed by the future indicative. So, if you will get money, you will be sorry. There, we're going to assume that this is true, and this will be the result. It's really sort of a threat, and that's how Greek is going to instruct it. It's not found very often, but again, it does exist. So those are our simple conditions. We're only going to use the indicative because they're presumed true. Now, general conditions are a little different. Now here, the outcome is assured, provided that the condition is fulfilled. This is the question here. The condition is not necessarily fulfilled. Right? We're only sort of speculating. And so because the condition is questionable, we don't want to use the indicative in that if portion, in the protasis portion of the sentence. So we're going to put it a little bit off into the sort of mists of possibility. So what we're going to start is by simply saying that the apodosis is going to be indicative. Right? So in the past general, we're going to use the imperfect indicative, because this is a fact. What's not a fact is the protasis, the if portion. And so for this, because we're using our main verb, and that's one thing that you should note, is the apodosis is always the main clause. The main verb is indicative in the past, so when we want to have something speculative, we're going to use the optative, a plus the optative. And we would say something to the effect of, if I had money, and sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but if I did, so whenever I had money, if ever I had money, I was unhappy. So the optative, and this is, recall that the optative is used in secondary sequence when your main verb is in the past. So if I had money, it's not necessarily assumed that I did, but if I did, I was happy. Present general, we're going to use a present indicative in our apodosis. Because we're saying that this is assured, this is a fact. What's not a fact is the condition. And so, because this is present, we're going to use a subjunctive here. Present is a primary tense, so we're going to use the subjunctive mood for our protasis. And instead of a, we're going to use a combination of a and on, aeon. So, if I have money, not necessarily assured, if I ever do, I am unhappy. So if ever I have money, I am unhappy. This may or may not be true at the moment, but this is the definite outcome. And then we have the future more vivid. So again, we're talking about the future, and it's a fact, so we're going to use the future indicative. But what's not a fact is the protasis, and so because this is future, a primary sequence verb, we're going to use the subjunctive, and we're going to use aeon. So, if I win the lottery, I will be rich. This is a definite outcome of this condition. However, this condition is not necessarily assured. So that's our future more vivid. And notice we've shifted a little bit. Futures are named slightly different because the future is by its nature not necessarily assured. So we've got simple conditions, general conditions, and then we're going to use contrary to fact conditions, although the future is not quite contrary to fact. But in a contrary to fact condition, the outcome cannot occur because the condition has not been fulfilled. The if part is false, therefore the then part can't be true. So we have three types of these. We have a past, present, and future. In the past, we're going to construct this by using a plus the aorist, followed by the aorist and the particle on. And that's something to keep in mind, that we will only ever see on in the apodosis in contrary to fact conditions or the future less vivid. So, and this is something to the effect of, if I had been there, I would have cheered. I wasn't there, therefore I didn't cheer, but this would have been the case had this been the situation. So A plus the aorist indicative, and the aorist indicative followed by on. Present contrary to fact, very closely related. We're going to use A plus the imperfect indicative, followed by the imperfect indicative. And again, that particle on. So if I were rich, I would have money. The implication here is that this outcome can't be the case because this is not true. A lot of logic is involved in these conditions. Finally, we have the future less vivid. And here, we're going to be talking about a state in the future, but really we're talking about wishes and potentials. Right? In the future, we've got potentiality. So to form a future less vivid, so we've got potential. We want a potential in the future. We're going to use the optative plus on in the apodosis. Right? Because if we're saying if something should happen, then something would potentially happen in the future, well, that's the optative plus on. That's our potential optative. And in our prodosis, in the condition part of this, we're going to use A plus the optative all by itself, because in some ways this is a wish. So if I should grow up, there's no guarantee I will. I would be a basketball player. This is the potential outcome of this wish, which may or may not happen. So the future less vivid is A plus the optative, followed by the optative plus on. So let's take a look at all of these, and I like to refer to the future less vivid also as a should, would, to remind me this is how I should translate the future less vivid. So let's look at all of these together. Conditions. And remember, the prodosis, the if, negates by may, and the apodosis negates by oo in all cases. So let's take a look first. We'll remember that the futures really need to be blocked out. They're separate. But we can look at simples. A, all simple conditions are going to use the indicative throughout. The generals are going to use indicative in the apodosis, but in the prodosis, we're going to use some form of either the optative or the subjunctive. Because in a general condition, it's the prodosis which is not guaranteed. In a contrary to fact statement, we're going to use A in the prodosis, on in the apodosis, and then, depending on the tense and mood, that will indicate what type of contrary to fact or less vivid condition there is. Now, just to draw your attention to these futures, we use different names for these. The future more vivid, the future most vivid, absolutely will happen, both of them. The future more vivid, again, the future is out in the, it's not guaranteed, but even less guaranteed is the condition. And then the future less vivid is really a situation where you have a wish followed by a potential optative. So memorize these formulas. You will encounter them all the time. If you have this chart memorized, and certainly this logic memorized, you will be able to address those conditions that you encounter in Greek and